English is a global language, and for many people around the world, learning it opens new doors, new opportunities, new friendships, and new ways of seeing the world. But for beginners, it often feels overwhelming. Grammar rules, complicated vocabulary, fast-paced conversations. It's a lot to take in. That's why it's so important to start with something simple, something that builds confidence instead of pressure. A story like The Lost Crowns is exactly that, a gentle, welcoming introduction to English, built to support those at the very beginning of their language journey. The story uses short, clear sentences that are easy to follow. Each word has been chosen carefully, not just to tell the story, but to help learners recognize useful vocabulary. These are the kinds of words they'll see in daily life, words they'll hear on the street, read in signs, or use in conversation. And because they're placed inside a story, they don't feel like vocabulary lists or exercises. Instead, they come alive through characters, settings, and events that are easy to understand and enjoyable to imagine. What makes The Lost Crowns special is not just its simplicity, but its purpose. It doesn't speak down to learners. It respects their effort. It invites them in, no pressure, no judgment. Each sentence builds on the next, giving learners time to absorb and connect ideas. The structure is natural, not forced. A character speaks, another responds, something happens, then something else, and slowly, without even realizing it, learners are following an English story in real time. That's when the learning becomes powerful, when it stops feeling like studying and starts feeling like discovery. This is what makes stories such a strong tool for language learning. They give context. They give emotion, and most importantly, they give purpose. When a learner hears the word crown in this story, they don't just memorize its meaning. They see it being used, they imagine it on a king's head or hidden in a forest. They feel the word, and that feeling helps them remember. Another important thing is the pace. The narration in The Lost Crowns is slow and steady. It gives space between sentences. It gives time to process. Beginners aren't rushed, they're guided, and as they listen, they're not just hearing sounds. They're tuning their ears to the rhythm of the English language, the rises and falls, the pauses, the natural flow of speech. This is essential, because before speaking well, a learner must hear well. Before understanding grammar, they must understand tone. This story helps with that too. And then there's the repetition, not the boring kind, but the helpful kind. Key words appear more than once. Familiar phrases return throughout the story. This gives learners multiple chances to recognize them, to make connections, and to feel more comfortable each time. Every sentence gives them one more piece of the puzzle. And by the end, they've understood a complete story in English. That's no small thing. That's real progress. The Lost Crowns also introduces basic sentence structure in a natural way. Learners see how English sentences are formed, not through charts or diagrams, but through actual use. He walked into the castle. She looked around. Where are the crowns? These are simple sentences, yes, but they're also real. They're how people actually speak. That matters, because fluency doesn't start with big words or complex grammar. It starts with real words in real situations, repeated often enough to feel natural. There's also imagination. When learners are invited into a world of adventure, their minds become more engaged. They're not just passive listeners. They become part of the story. They want to know what happens next. Will the crowns be found? Who took them? What does it mean for the kingdom? This emotional involvement creates a deeper connection to the language. And when the mind is emotionally involved, it remembers more. It learns faster. That's the beauty of a well-crafted beginner story. It doesn't overwhelm. It encourages, it welcomes, and it teaches, not with pressure, but with patience. The Lost Crowns is not just a lesson, it's an experience, an invitation to explore English in a way that feels safe, engaging, and exciting. It proves that you don't need to know 100 words to begin. You just need the right words in the right setting, told the right way. And for anyone who has ever felt unsure about starting their English journey, this story offers a simple message: you can learn. You will understand, and every word you hear brings you one step closer to fluency. Let the story be your teacher, quiet, kind, and always ready to guide you forward. One of the most powerful ways to learn English, especially as a beginner, is to learn new words through context. Not from long vocabulary lists or isolated flashcards, but from within a story. That's where understanding happens naturally, where words gain meaning beyond definitions. And that's exactly what this story offers: a chance to learn English vocabulary in a way that feels real, exciting, and deeply connected to the events unfolding within the tale. In The Lost Crowns, every word has a place, a reason for being there. As the mystery builds, the listener is introduced to new vocabulary not in a random order, but in a meaningful sequence that follows the story's journey. For example, when the story opens with a quiet kingdom preparing for a festival, words like castle, celebration, royal, and throne come into focus. Learners don't just hear these words, they feel them, they picture them. The castle isn't just a structure anymore, it's the heart of the story. The crown isn't just a noun, it's the symbol of power, of something that has gone missing, something that must be found. That's the difference context makes. It adds color, it adds emotion, it adds memory, and when you connect a word to a moment, something visual, something dramatic, something curious, it becomes much easier to remember. That's why a story like this is more than entertainment. It's a language lesson that doesn't feel like one. Let's say the character in the story whispers, "The crowns have vanished." That sentence might be short, but it's rich in learning. The word vanished doesn't come with a definition, but through the tone, the action, and the suspense, the listener immediately senses its meaning. It means gone. It means disappeared. And because it's tied to something important in the story, the learner remembers it. They're not just learning vocabulary, they're living it. Best part is it doesn't feel forced. The new words flow naturally. A guard searches the corridors. A princess questions the servants. A thief hides in the shadows. Each of these actions builds tension in the story, but also teaches language in action. Learners get to see how verbs, nouns, and adjectives come together. They're not studying parts of speech. They're watching them move, interact, and bring a story to life. This method is especially helpful for those who find memorization difficult, because let's face it, memorizing a list of 20 random words doesn't always work. But when those same 20 words appear throughout a story, in different scenes, with different meanings and emotions attached to them, they stick. They're heard, seen, imagined, and repeated, and without realizing it, the learner begins using them too. There's also the magic of mystery. A tale like The Lost Crowns doesn't just teach vocabulary, it invites curiosity. What happened to the crowns? Who could have taken them? Was it a betrayal, a trick, a test? That sense of intrigue pulls the listener in, keeps them focused, and encourages them to keep listening. Even if they don't understand every single word, that's okay, because in context, the unknown words start to make sense. Learners guess, they connect, they fill in the blanks, and that process is learning at its most active, most memorable state. What makes it even more effective is that the story is filled with royalty-themed vocabulary, words that belong to a very specific world. Scepter, royal guard, banquet, jewel, heir, council, and so many more. These are words learners might not encounter every day, but in a story like this, they become relevant. They build a setting. They build a culture, and once they've been learned in one story, they're easier to recognize in others. Books, shows, movies, even conversations. It's also worth noting how repeated exposure helps. Important vocabulary returns more than once, but not in exactly the same way. One moment the crown is missing, later it's hidden, then it's recovered. This subtle shift in wording adds depth and variety, giving learners the chance to see how ideas can be expressed in multiple ways. That's vocabulary building with dimension, not just definition. And because the story is told with emotion and pace, the words don't sit still. They move with rhythm. This allows learners to hear natural sentence patterns and stress on keywords. They begin to notice which words carry emotion and how they sound in real speech. That's pronunciation training without drills. That's listening practice without pressure. By the end of the story, learners haven't just followed a mystery. They've traveled through a world of language, learning dozens of new words simply by being present and engaged. They remember the words because they remember the story. They feel what the characters felt. They see what they saw, and that's what makes it powerful. Because when vocabulary is learned in context, it's not just remembered, it's understood. When learning any new language, listening is often the first real test. It's one thing to read words on a page or practice simple phrases, but it's a completely different experience to hear them spoken aloud. For English learners, especially beginners, listening can feel like trying to catch raindrops in a storm, fast, scattered, and overwhelming. That's why clear pronunciation and slow, paced narration matter so much. They don't just help learners understand what's being said. They build the foundation for confidence, comprehension, and communication. In The Lost Crowns, every word is spoken with care. The narration is calm and steady, allowing each syllable to be heard clearly. There's no rush, no background noise, no difficult accents to decode. Just a clean, focused voice guiding learners through each sentence, step by step. This kind of listening experience is not just helpful, it's essential. It gives beginners the space they need to process English as it's naturally spoken, without being overwhelmed. Clear pronunciation is more than just speaking slowly. It's about intention. Each sound is given the right attention, vowels are open, consonants are crisp, and words are separated just enough to be distinct but not robotic. This teaches learners how English is supposed to sound in real life, without throwing them into complex, rapid speech they're not ready for. And because the story is interesting, learners stay engaged, which means they listen longer, and the longer they listen, the more they learn. One of the key benefits of this kind of narration is that it helps learners identify word boundaries. In natural conversation, words often blend together. What are you doing can sound like what you doing to an unfamiliar ear. But in this story, the pacing allows learners to hear where one word ends and another begins. That's a huge help for understanding sentence structure and for building listening confidence. The more a learner hears these patterns, the more familiar they become. This also improves pronunciation skills over time. When a learner hears English spoken clearly, they begin to imitate it, not just the words, but the tone, the rhythm, and the flow. They start to notice which syllables are stressed, where the pauses fall, and how questions rise in tone. And even if they're not speaking yet, their brain is learning. It's training the ear to expect the right sounds, which eventually leads to producing those sounds correctly when they're ready to speak. The story format supports this learning even more. Instead of random sentences, learners hear full conversations. They hear a guard asking a question, a queen giving a command, a servant telling a secret. These aren't just isolated lines, they're exchanges. They have meaning, emotion, and timing. And because the narration is consistent and carefully paced, learners are able to follow these exchanges without losing track. Another benefit of slow-paced narration is emotional space. When a story moves too fast, it's easy for learners to get discouraged. They miss a word, then a sentence, then the meaning is gone. But when the narration slows down, they have time to catch up. They can pause if needed, replay a line, or even guess the meaning from context before moving on. That reduces anxiety and keeps learners motivated. Instead of giving up, they keep listening, and every second they listen adds to their progress. And it's not just about language, it's about trust. When learners hear a narrator speak slowly and clearly, it feels like the story is being told for them, not for advanced speakers, not for native listeners, but for them, the beginner, the learner, the one still figuring it all out. That's powerful. It shows respect. It creates a space where learning feels safe, not stressful, and that emotional comfort makes a huge difference in how much they absorb. Through this method, learners begin to develop something even more important than vocabulary. They build listening stamina. That's the ability to stay focused and engaged during a full story. At first, even 5 minutes can feel like a long time. But with gentle, slow-paced narration, they begin to stretch that limit, 10 minutes, then 15, then an entire story, and soon they realize they've just understood a full English story by listening alone. That's how growth happens, not through force, but through small, steady moments of clarity, one sentence at a time, one word at a time. And with each moment, the learner becomes more comfortable, more capable, and more ready to step into the language fully. When you listen slowly, you understand deeply. One of the biggest challenges for English learners is grammar. It can seem complicated with its rules, exceptions, and endless explanations. For beginners especially, grammar can quickly become a source of confusion and frustration. But what many don't realize is that grammar doesn't always need to be taught in charts or textbooks. In fact, one of the most effective and enjoyable ways to understand basic grammar is by hearing it used naturally inside a story. That's what makes The Lost Crowns so useful. It teaches grammar not by explaining it, but by showing it sentence by sentence, line by line. When a learner listens to this story, they begin to absorb grammar without even noticing it. Every sentence is a lesson in structure. When a character says, "The crown is missing," that's the present simple tense in action. No need to label it. Just hear it. Later, when another character says, "We searched the castle," that's past simple, and it shows how actions are expressed once they've already happened. Again, no pressure to memorize rules. Just listen, follow, and understand the flow. That's how grammar learning becomes natural, not forced. The repetition of common patterns helps too. English is built on structure, and this story uses simple, clean sentence construction that repeats throughout. She went to the tower. He found a clue. They asked the guards. These are short, direct sentences, but they are powerful building blocks. Learners begin to notice the subject, verb, object format without being told. They begin to expect it, and over time that structure becomes second nature, something they can both understand and use in their own speech. Another quiet strength of the story lies in its use of questions and responses. These interactions are gold for beginners. Where are the crowns? Teaches word order in a question. They are gone. Shows how answers are formed. Who took them? We don't know. These back and forth exchanges allow learners to hear real grammar in conversation, just as it's used in everyday speech. It doesn't feel like a lesson, it feels like being part of the story. That emotional engagement helps the brain remember more clearly. There's also variety in sentence length and structure. While many sentences are short for clarity, the story doesn't avoid complexity entirely. As it progresses, learners hear longer sentences that still remain easy to follow. For example, when the queen arrived at the empty throne room, she knew something was wrong. That sentence shows how two ideas can be connected, an action and a realization. It introduces connecting words like when and teaches cause and effect all in one smooth moment. The grammar is there, it's just quietly doing its job in the background. Learners also benefit from the use of pronouns and possessives throughout the story. He took his crown, she lost her necklace, they opened their chamber. These forms can often be confusing when taught in isolation, but inside a story they become clearer. The characters and context give clues. Listeners understand who he and she refer to, and what his and her mean in relation to those people. Without memorizing rules, they're seeing how English grammar handles ownership and identity. Articles a, an, and the are another tricky part of grammar that this story helps clarify. Rather than teaching the difference directly, the story simply uses them in the correct way: a crown, an idea, the royal chamber. Learners begin to notice when each one is used and why. It becomes a matter of feel, of pattern recognition, not strict rule following. That's how language is learned most effectively, by noticing, not by forcing. Even verb forms like modal verbs and conditionals show up in gentle ways. We must find the crowns. If they are not found, the kingdom will be in danger. These lines introduce necessity and cause-effect structure in a way that makes sense. The story explains the grammar through action and suspense, not through definition. And that's what keeps learners engaged. They aren't stopping to think about grammar. They're experiencing it in motion, in a world that matters. By the end of the story, the listener has heard dozens of examples of how English grammar works, not through lessons, but through storytelling. That's the magic. The language teaches itself. The brain connects the dots, fills in the blanks, and gradually builds understanding. And all the while, learners are also enjoying a tale of mystery, royalty, and adventure. Because grammar doesn't have to be boring. It just has to be real. Learning a new language, especially in the beginning, can sometimes feel like a chore. There are so many rules to remember, so many words to memorize, and so many things to understand all at once. That's why it's so important to make the process enjoyable, something that feels more like a journey than a classroom task. And one of the best ways to do that is through storytelling. Story-driven learning has a unique ability to hold attention, spark curiosity, and most importantly, keep learners coming back for more. When someone listens to a story like The Lost Crowns, they're not just listening to words, they're following a plot. There's a situation, a problem, and a search for answers. Right from the beginning, the listener wants to know what will happen next. That natural sense of curiosity becomes a powerful learning tool. Instead of focusing on the difficulty of English, the learner becomes focused on the mystery. Who lost the crowns? Where did they go? Was it a mistake or something more serious? These questions become the driving force that keeps the listener engaged. And that engagement is key, because when someone is interested, they stop thinking about how hard the task is. They stop worrying about every single grammar point or unfamiliar word. They lean in, they try to understand. They connect ideas, and as they do, their brain is actively learning, making connections, noticing patterns, and absorbing language more efficiently than any worksheet could provide. The beauty of story-driven learning is that it creates emotional involvement. Learners begin to care about the characters. They start to imagine the kingdom, the palace, the guards, the secret hallways. This emotional connection makes the vocabulary more meaningful. Words like treasure, throne, banquet, and betrayal aren't just words. They become part of the world the listener is visualizing. When the story says the queen looked out over her silent kingdom, The learner isn't just processing a sentence. They are seeing the moment, feeling the mood. And that kind of learning lasts. Stories also provide a structure that naturally supports learning. Beginning, middle, and end, setup, conflict, and resolution. These story elements offer a rhythm that the brain understands. They create a sense of progress, and progress keeps people motivated. After all, it's satisfying to feel like something is unfolding, like each minute of listening brings you closer to the end of the mystery. And when learners reach that final moment, when the crowns are found or the truth is revealed, they don't just feel satisfied by the plot, they feel proud of themselves for having followed it in English. Another strength of story-driven learning is its gentle repetition. Key words and phrases come back again and again in new ways. The crowns are missing. We must find the crowns. Who stole the crowns? These variations reinforce the language without feeling repetitive or boring. The repetition is wrapped in new situations, which keeps it interesting, and learners begin to notice how the same words can be used in different ways, something that's hard to grasp through memorization alone. Because the story is designed for beginners, it also avoids overwhelming learners with complex details. The sentences are clear, the pacing is thoughtful, and the vocabulary is carefully selected to suit early-stage learners. But that doesn't mean the story is dull. It's still full of emotion, surprise, worry, hope, and resolution. That emotional energy makes the experience more memorable, and it builds a stronger connection to the language being used. Even better, stories like this encourage continued practice. A learner who enjoys one story is more likely to listen to another and another. It creates a habit, a regular exposure to English in a format that feels less like a lesson and more like entertainment. This consistency is where real progress comes from, not from cramming for a test, but from enjoying the process enough to return to it again and again. And it's not just about language skills. Story-driven learning helps build confidence. When learners realize they can follow an entire story in English, even with some new words, they begin to believe in their ability. That belief is powerful. It makes them want to keep going, to take the next step, to listen more, speak more, and eventually understand more of the world around them through English. Because when learning feels like a story, it doesn't feel like work, it feels like discovery. One of the most useful things about a story like The Lost Crowns is how flexible it is. It doesn't require a textbook, a worksheet, or even a teacher in the room. All it needs is a listener, someone willing to hear and follow the story. That's what makes it such a powerful tool for learning English. Whether someone is studying on their own, sitting in a classroom, or just listening during their daily routine, the story fits right in. It adapts to different learning styles, and it supports comprehension in a way that feels natural and effective. For self-learners, especially those who may not have access to formal classes, this story is a perfect resource. They can listen at their own pace, pause when needed, rewind parts they didn't understand, and play it again and again until things begin to click. There's no time pressure, no one watching, just a calm and clear story that guides them gently through real English. This kind of freedom builds comfort and confidence, and with every replay, understanding deepens. The structure of the story helps listeners anticipate what's coming next, which sharpens their ability to follow spoken language without needing to translate each word. Self-practice is also about consistency, and when something is interesting, learners are more likely to return to it. The mystery behind the missing crowns, the characters involved, and the sense of movement in the story give people a reason to keep listening. Each section of the story delivers not just new vocabulary, but more chances to hear English in action. That kind of repetition through interest, not through force, is one of the best ways to improve comprehension naturally. In a classroom setting, the story offers a shared experience. Instead of giving students random dialogues or disconnected grammar drills, a teacher can play the story and invite everyone into the same world. After listening, students can discuss what happened, answer questions, predict what might come next, or even act out small scenes. This not only helps with listening comprehension, but also speaking, reading, and writing skills. The story becomes a platform for multiple forms of practice, all tied together by a single, engaging narrative. Because the story is paced clearly and uses beginner-friendly language, teachers can use it without needing to simplify it further. That saves time, and it makes the classroom experience more dynamic. Students aren't just sitting through lectures, they're interacting with the material. They're connecting emotionally with the characters and events, and that emotional link makes the learning more meaningful. It also makes it easier for students to recall the story and the vocabulary used within it, even days or weeks later. Then there's the option of everyday listening, something that's often overlooked, but incredibly valuable. A learner can simply listen to the story during a walk, while riding the bus, or even while doing chores. They don't have to sit down and study in a formal way. They can let the language wash over them, slowly becoming more familiar with how English sounds, how it flows, and how it expresses ideas. This kind of passive learning might seem small at first, but over time it adds up. The brain continues to process the language in the background, building a stronger sense of rhythm, tone, and structure without extra effort. The flexibility of the story also allows for different levels of interaction. On one day, a learner might just listen and enjoy. On another, they might write down new words they hear or try to summarize the plot in their own words. This kind of variation keeps things fresh. It prevents boredom and allows learners to grow gradually from simple understanding to deeper analysis, and because the story is always there ready to be replayed, it gives learners control over how they use it. That control leads to ownership, and ownership leads to motivation. Comprehension is about more than just hearing words. It's about following ideas, catching meaning from tone and structure, and being able to connect one sentence to the next. A story like this trains all of those skills at once, without being overwhelming, without feeling like work, and that's what makes it ideal, not just for one type of learner, but for anyone who wants to improve their English in a way that feels real, flexible, and lasting. Because the best tools for learning are the ones that meet you where you are and take you one step further every time. Thank you for joining this journey through the Lost Crowns, where every word, every sentence, and every scene helps build real English skills. Whether you're learning alone in class or just listening daily, remember, stories teach best when they speak to the heart. Keep listening, keep learning, and let each story bring you one step closer to fluency.